Josh here again, and it took me longer than I expected, sorry about that all, but I've just finished this book today, and if you haven't guessed, I am reviewing Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail 72 by famous, and in many circles infamous, American author Hunter S. Thompson, one of my favorite authors. I've been reading his books. If you haven't noticed, I'll probably post a link to all of them on actually, you know what, you can just find them on the channel. It's under book reviews, it's the majority of them. Anyway, this book, the story per se, this is more of a journalistic account, so it is not quite as, well, in his style, gonzo as Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas or The Rum Diary, but it is much closer to that style than Hell's Angels. Now, the story, like I said, the title would imply, is about the 1972 presidential elections in America, Nixon, McGovern, Humphrey, all that and whatnot. And it covers it in excruciatingly detail, in much the same way Hell's Angels. It covers it in many different angles, this time not implying what it is. Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail 72 definitely just tells you what Hunter S. Thompson thinks instead of letting you form your own opinion, which I'll get to in a minute. But majorly it is told from a lot of different perspectives. It's told from Hunter S. Thompson's own twisted perspective on events. It's told from the politician's angle, mostly postscript, but still. It's told from the campaign manager's angle, the everyday supporters angle, the cheerers angle, and it's interesting to listen to the perceptions of reality in this. And then later in the book, it kind of goes into architect territory and starts delving into the perception and difference between the perception and reality of the campaign. And I won't get into any of that there for the rest of. Feels odd to say spoilers in a journalistic account, but regardless, I will say spoilers just for lack of a better word. And I will say this book does work a lot better, pacing-wise, than Hell's Angels did, in my opinion. I thought Hell's Angels was a little rambling, and there was far too many quotes injected in. This time around, the quotes are a lot better balanced. There's a lot less of them, and all of them have very obvious significance, and also more complexity to them, which I really appreciated. As well, in between the journalistic accounts, Thompson has more of a sense of humor here than he did in Hell's Angels, and sometimes even goes into the rants that we all know and love him for about his own crazy experiences along the road. Now, for those that are just graduating from Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas and or The Rum Diary, this is a definite place to step into his journalistic accounts, but also remember this is something very different than those. This is a semi-fictionalized account of the 1972 presidential elections, with some particularly hilarious moments per se, but it is still a journalistic account, and it reads much in that way. It is more of a story than Hell's Angels is, so you don't have to worry about any non-linear narrative for the most part. There's some postscript down the bottom of each page, but not often, and most of the time, if it's long, then it's pertinent to what he's trying to get across. So overall, the book definitely does succeed on the story front, where it's much easier to follow, and it's more interesting to follow because it's more intricate. Personally, being a resident of Canada, I have extreme trouble and difficulty understanding the American electoral system, and this was a good lesson for that in particular. But that's neither here or there. Regardless, getting on to his writing style, like I said, this is more of a journalistic account, but he does often have time for digressions and his more wild rants in this than he did in Hell's Angels. And I realize I keep referencing back Hell's Angels, so it's probably better to watch this review before that one, or whatever. But, nonetheless, it is excellent writing, of course, all the time, for the most part. Outside of there's certain points in the book where he delves into an interview-style process for lack of not being able to write it himself. And this is, it gets the information across, but is a little dry and more taxing to read, per se. Not difficult, but it's just not as smooth a read. And unfortunately, the latter half of the book is largely composed of these. And while that's not necessarily a problem in and of itself, it does dampen the mood of that the first bit of the book really got you in. After the first 150 pages, 200 pages, I think the book really starts to pick up and it really gets along from there. The pacing really works. Now, the one thing you also should know about this book is that this includes photographs like it did in Hell's Angels, but also for art by Ralph Steadman. Now, Ralph Steadman, a constant co-conspirator of Hunter S. Thompson, often did the artwork in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, if you've read that. I'm sure you probably have if you're listening to this. And if you haven't, go read it now. But is definitely intact here. It is much more cramped per se. Some of the dialogue within the art scenes is very hard to read, if not impossible at times. But I will say that I do think this adds a great deal to the book. The pictures allow you to much easier put a face to the many characters in the story, and there is very, very many characters, so in the start it is quite hard to discern them if you hadn't lived through the events, which obviously I haven't. Now, as the art itself, I do think the art is still fantastic. However, it doesn't seem to contain the same kind of vivaciousness that it is in the other books. It's still very good art, but it's my very, I don't want to say restrained, because Stedman's art is anything from restrained, but the theme of the art all seems to be about exactly the same, which is all Nixon is a fucking devil, basically. And I realize that is obviously almost the purpose of this book, but that is what I want to get into now, and that's one of the problems with Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail 72, is that the theme is very obvious. Outside of the first 50 pages, perhaps, and if you don't know the story already, outside of those, you really get the feeling that Hunter S. Thompson wants to portray two things. One, the death of new politics after the 60s, the wave of hope, and he wants to display the truth of politics. At one point he even compares political junkies to adrenaline junkies, and they're no better than them, which is an apt comparison, but that's besides the point. The book largely hammers home this point, and hammers it home with great efficiency. The problem being that at 500 pages long, little plus actually, I think 505 pages, it does start to wear a little thin. Now, that's not necessarily a problem, and this is still a fantastic book, but be warned that if you're going to be marathoning this thing, you probably shouldn't. It does take quite a bit of time to unfold, and any avid reader of Hunter S. Thompson will quickly gather what's being said, and may get a chance to revel in Hunter S. Thompson's viewpoint, but more often than not will be frustrated by the sheer length of the novel. I don't necessarily mind long novels, but this novel doesn't seem to have a massive amount to say. So, in conclusion, if you were looking for a Hunter S. Thompson book to get into his journalistic style, I would still take this over Hell's Angels. In my opinion, Hell's Angels is a great book, but is definitely more, you need to be an uber fan to appreciate, or a fan of journalistic writing and books. If you're not used to that, then definitely, if you're coming off Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, pick up Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail 72. The app comparison in titles should lead you to that conclusion anyway, but this still has the art that you come to know and probably appreciate, and still contains a good amount of the writing that you've come accustomed to that will be entertaining and thought-provoking for you in here. So, pick it up. I am recommending it.